Hi, we are in the Substrate seminar on September 29th, actually. Can everybody hear me? Hey, uh, so my voice sound okay? Everything's... Hi, we are in the Substrate seminar on October... Okay, cool. So this week we have invited Ben in here to discuss about Substrate version 2.0. It is launched already, and he'll introduce what is happening in the Substrate 2.0 and releasing going forward. Yeah, as the slideshow. So I will pass the time to Ben to let him share more. Yep.
All right. Thank you very much, Jimmy. Before I go on, I'm going to talk about SemVer a little bit, so semantic versioning, and I was just curious how many people know what it is. So just type it in the chat. I know this is slightly delayed. If you don't know what it is, say don't know. I'm going to come back to that later. I just want to have a rough idea. So I made a quick introduction on Substrate 2.0. And I want to talk about what that actually means. So in case you haven't noticed, we've released Substrate 2.0 just let's say a few months after the deadline that we had set ourselves, but we can always blame COVID, right? So we blame COVID. But overall, yay, we've made it.
Yeah.
Substrate 2.0, it's here. So what exactly does that mean, 2.0? So we've discussed this a lot at this over the time span, and one of the reasons I wanted to get it out was to take the pressure off it and what it means. People started adding, oh, this needs to go into this, and this needs to go in this, and this stability is needed, that kind of stuff. And even the day I was like, okay, I'm going to push the button now, people came back to me like, oh yeah, I would like to have this following feature, and I don't even have a functional pull request yet. I was like, no, this is simply not gonna work because we've pushed this release on and on just to get this over. And I wanted to clarify what 2.0 is, how you should understand it, how it helps you, and how things are going to progress going forward. So what is 2.0? I'm taking the definition. I think that's the best explanation of what this actually is from Phil, who wrote the blog post on communicating that this is out, and where he says, look, we had this thing. It was called Substrate 1.0 back in 2018, where we proved that you could make this pluggable consensus and this more of a forkless runtime operates. And we've put that out there as the Substrate 1.0. But quite honestly, you couldn't really build stuff with that. It was a good proof of concept. It was showing that this exactly could be achieved. And then we've chipped away at making something that you can actually use to build parachains, but also just independent blockchains since then. And Substrate 2.0 marks this point where we say, okay, we have something now that we've used to build Polkadot. The Polkadot launch was built with Substrate 2.0. And then we've taken a little longer time, and we've if you've been following this closely, you've seen that we had a couple of alpha releases and then beta, and then at the end, release candidates throughout the launch of Polkadot. And that was meant to be features and more of a bug fixes that we see that need to be on-chain for Polkadot, that they also just flow back into Substrate 2.0. And then at some point when we say, we think this is stable-ish enough, as a baseline to work on stuff, we're going to release this as 2.0. And this is exactly what this is. It's a set of crates, it's a set of features and tools that we have that we think are amazing to build blockchains with. Contrast to 1.0, where we gave out something that you honestly couldn't really build stuff with. But if you look about this feature set that 2.0 is, and for a lot of you, this will feel super familiar already. So we have Babe and Grandpa. Like I'm just counting some things that we had compared to 1.0. Like Babe and Grandpa, obviously, the democracy palette, contracts palette, and EVM implementation, the treasury palette, multi-sig feature set. Frame itself was there at 1.0, right? Frame wasn't yet its own thing. It wasn't. It was tied together into this really big thing. And one of the things we did very early after that release was actually pull them apart, isolate Frame, figure out Frame and the different palettes and the way that we think is a good way to structure a runtime, and consolidated that in Frame and separated that from the outer system. And even off-chain workers were not in 1.0. Off-chain workers, that's probably something that for most of you is just a given now. Like there's no, why would you ever go back to what before off-chain workers? But one thing that we have to make clear to ourselves is we hadn't actually released any of that to the wider public until yet. 1.0 didn't have it. We didn't do any releases after 1.0 because of structural things we had in the repo that made it impossible to do this. But now it is out there. And so 2.0 is the first time that we actually get off-chain workers out there into the hands of people. But more importantly, in my opinion, there it is. There was a slide in between. 2.0 marks the time where we actually switch to semantic versioning. And this is why I was asking about Semver before. So before that, we've launched this, like a bunch of crates as 1.0. We haven't really published any updates on them, so versioning wasn't really a big deal. But throughout the process of 2.0, especially about the alpha, beta, and then the release candidates we made, it became clear that a lot of crates don't actually change that much. Although we don't feel like we've figured out everything yet, there's a bunch of crates where even bigger changes that we do don't actually change the API anymore or the way that the thing behaves in general. And so it became apparent that releasing them every time with, like, in this big thing, that major release 2.0, where everything is a 2.0, for everything that we now do, like if we add, one of the things that we're currently working on is remote signing of the key store, that would have to be released at 3.0 because it's just breaking. And that doesn't make sense for this huge amount of traits that we have to have one version for all of them. So the first thing we're going to do is split these versions in half crates with their own separate versions. And from that point forward, follow Semver. So Semver is, for those who are not familiar with this, there's a specification on semantic versioning. The idea is, in general in versioning, is that you can identify iterations of releases, and with semantic version in particular, to be able to express the compatibility between them. That is achieved through a mechanism where you have three numbers which are just separated by a period, the major, the minor, and the patch version, and everything on. Thank you, Dan, for the link. Major changes are breaking, and just on minor and patch are non-breaking. And this system is actually being used by Rust, in particular by Cargo, to automatically resolve and update your dependencies. The way it can do that is by always being able to upgrade any minor and patch version. It can do that because the breaking change definition that Cargo employs, whenever you change the API in a way so that the other stuff that depends on it doesn't build anymore, then you have to upgrade the major version, which in this case would mean 2.0 to 3.0, for example. There's one caveat in that spec, and as for every good rule, there's an exception, and that exception is the 0 major, which indicates that stuff is generally considered unstable and not worthy of production version yet, where the minor and the patch version are actually to be considered the major and the patch version. But in general, this allows you to release a 2.1, a 2.2 with new features, or a 2.11 with a patch on that feature, and they would all be compatible with what you've currently defined as 2.0. And that is something we can express now through this mechanism. So looking at that from the example of our node template, so first off, we do have our own version here, which is also a Semver version, right? So we define, if you are depending on this crate, if you define this version and we made a feature, an additional feature, we would probably release it as 2.1. You could just upgrade that and it should still work in the sense of compile. Then, for example, in here we have the struct up Semver definition for 3.8, which means that anything in the 0.3 can be used in here, as long as it is at least of the patch level 8. That is often indicating like specific version that needs to be done, or in this case, because it's a feature version, there might be a feature that was introduced in 0.3.8 that you depend upon. So 0.3.7 would not be compatible. Neither would 0.4 be, though, and 1.0 as well. But most of the crates that we've released are now 2.00. And you can see here that is the major version 2.00 for SP Core, which makes them also compatible with, like, if we were to release patches for this and then release them as 0.1 or 0.20 or whatever. But also new features, as long as they are compatible in terms of you can still build your old code with that new feature in it. So, for example, you add a new function on the struct that is being used. We could release as 2.1, and you could just upgrade on the next iteration cycle that you want to do that. We've also released a few. Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, so like, as people who have already developed in Substrate, they may know that like there are a lot of packages in Substrate. So if one package need to be like is upgrade, like will all package all like in sync, like to upgrade, like will be upgraded from 2.0.0 to 2.0.1, like all package, or there will be a point that like some package will update by itself only and not the whole Substrate be updated. Is it?
Yeah. So the way this works, and this depends on the implementation, but in Cargo, the Rust package manager, it tries to resolve to as many versions as possible. So if for example, this one uses SP Core 2.0, and another crate that is in the dependency uses 2.1, it would automatically resolve to 2.1 as the dependency that is built into it, because 2.1 is compatible with 2.0. In general, it does it this way. If you have a cargo log file, you need to manually do this process. Otherwise, every time you say cargo build, it will actually look at the remote repository at crates.io and upgrade to the latest patch version that is applicable. It doesn't do that on a cargo log file because you want to have that locked more or less. That is not true, obviously, for major versions, because then Cargo can't automatically resolve that because they break. So if there was a SP Core 2.0 and an SP Core 3.0 somewhere, they would not be resolved into one crate. However, if they're just a dependency within the tree and they don't have to interact, so the struct from SP Core 2 and SP Core 3 never cross, you would just have both built in.
Okay.
That's fine. We actually have that a lot in Substrate node by itself, just through the dependency tree. If you look at that, double dependencies, we have that for parking lot, for logging. There's a few 0x dependencies that we just have multiple times built in because different versions are being used. It just bloats the binary a little bit, but it's not that much of a concern.
Okay, cool.
All right. So we still have released a few as 0x, so 0.8, primarily version numbers as well. That is mainly to indicate that we know we're going to break that. That we have stuff in there that might even is already flagged as deprecated, but that we still need because other stuff in the dependency system hasn't caught up yet with changes made. So it has a compatibility for that. And just to indicate that we don't expect this to be built upon too much in that specific state, we've released them as 0.8. So far, so clear? If you have questions, please user ask questions. I see that thing.
There is a questions, yeah.
And yes, I see that.
I'll just read it out here. When we have independent versions per crate, how is this going to work with a mono repo? You want to have branches tags per crate in order to manage multiple versions.
So Hanan already responded to this. No, we were just going to have different version numbers. We're not going to use Git too much to actually indicate this. We're not going to have branches for 2.0 or like a 2 series or a 3 series. We're going to have tags. Basically the crate name dash and then the V and the version number that was tagged. But generally, like that allows us to, for example, on a 2.0, then if we see that there's a security issue, we can branch off that, create a temporary branch, and release a version that is 2.0.1 based off of that. But we will not have continuous branches per version per crate or something. We basically follow what Tokyo or Tracing and some other projects are doing that don't have that many crates, to be honest, but still like in the tens or twenties of them, where at some point, especially the ones that are low in the tree, they just don't get updated as often. And then the ones higher in the tree might have higher cycles, but doesn't really matter. So most crates don't change.
Okay. Oh, and I have a question also. So from the way you describe it, it seems that we will encourage people to upgrade from version 1.x to version 2. For example, in future, like if version 3 comes, do you see like there will be 2 major branch maintained together by Parity? So like maybe at 2.5, it also has a 3.0 out, but then we will also continue to maintain like 2.6, 2.7 while we have version 3 there.
So I will come back to that question in another context anyways, but to answer it real quickly, what exactly is 3.0 once you start talking about singular crates? Like already today, we don't have the substrate crate, right? That all of this is bundled upon. There is potentially, like for some crates might have breaking changes, but if they're low in the tree, they become a 3.0 or even a 4.0 because we do 2 consecutive changes on that. But they are not exposed through the crates in between. So, like if you really think of the tree, we have like 3 or 4 layers actually of crates. And if something changes, even breaks in the lowest layer, you on the top layer are not necessarily concerned with that at all, because the layer in between is the one where that is built. So there, it might not be like a major upgrade from 2.0 to 3.0 anymore. It's just a major upgrade from 2.0 to 2.1. And that is for you, building upon that intermediate crate, a completely opaque thing that you don't even have to care about. If you are, and that is probably true for the majority of people that are building upon it, pallets are already a very high layer. You have to understand, and there is a concern that having multiple versions might become tricky to figure out in a later situation. But I'm not very concerned about this. The process, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, that we intend to do here should allow for frequent updates that are pretty easy to upgrade to compared to other systems, because we are in Cargo, because we are in Rust. It allows a lot of more easiness in this. Yeah. But in general, yes, to answer the beginning of the question, I highly recommend to jump to 2.0. And also, you can now switch off Git branches. You can just use crates, crates.io to manage your versioning, which is pretty nice already. Which also means you can finally publish your own palettes and crates that depend on other crates, because they're also now crates.io, not as Git branches anymore somewhere. the jump from 1.0 to 2.0, because 1.0 basically didn't have the features that were needed, is a tough one. The easiest one is probably to just use the no template as we give it to you and plug in the stuff that you changed. If you have been upgrading in between somewhere, that is still probably the easiest choice, to take the latest no template and start with that and add the stuff that you added.
And we have a lot of tutorial on no template, how to use it in Substrate.dev.
Exactly. I think it has never been easier to actually get started on this. Yeah. And for most of the stuff that people do, they don't depend on specific versions somewhere below in the tree. Like, if you were to build your own consensus, come talk to us, because then we'd like to talk about how to figure that one out and how to manage that nicely. But overall, the API isn't even changed in like 9 months or something. That significantly, we don't think it's going to change that much in the future. There's another question from Will. What is your approach to prevent a package from directly and indirectly depend on several different versions of crate? This seems to be manually tracked down once in a while when it becomes too much, like A depends on B v1 and C and D, but C depends on B v1.1 and C depends on B 1.3. So this one that you talk about specifically is actually solved through Cargo and Semware, because they're all number one, and they can be linearly upgraded. 1.1, so version B would, after Cargo resolved that for you, just be 1.3. Doesn't matter. The problem would only arise if there's major version changes. And that we still have yet to see if that is actually a problem. One idea for a solution, should that really become a problem, though, is to go the road that Tokyo is also doing, which is a meta crate. So rather than having this node package which has this dependency tree by itself, you would just say Substrate node version 3, and then that would be something that we provide that has basically the entire tree figured out of different versions. There's an SP Core 2.0, and then there's a, I don't know, Genesis config generator 4.3, and that kind of stuff, and they are compatible. So far, we haven't actually seen that issue really being an issue. The one that you describe here is actually a non-issue because that is automatically resolved. For major versions, we have to see if that actually becomes an issue in the first place. It's mostly theoretical. Could you mark that as answered?
Yep.
All right. Then I will continue for now. So this is about Semware itself, and we already got a little bit into what 2.0 actually means, at least in my opinion. So one of the things it means is no more Git dependencies. Yay! You can actually publish your stuff. If you publish a palette that has the name palette-something in it, it will even show up in the Substrate marketplace automatically. Awesome. It will also not break because other palette versions are upgraded, unless, of course, they are major versions. But it's still going to work because we've published the other one. As mentioned before, this is the last of the uniform releases. We're not going to continue having one version number for all of the crates. We technically even didn't do that this time because we have this 2.0 and we have this 0.8 differentiator already. But even within our repo, we have pre-released a bunch of things like the Substrate version runner and runner builder, which are their own 1 point something already because we've released multiple versions of that.
Can you explain a little bit more, like why 2.0 with that 0.8 instead of like just upgrade everything to 2.0?
Because a few people were concerned that they already knew. So we still have a few features coming up, right? We have parachains and cumulus as big things on the horizon. Both of them do not depend on 2.0, but actually on branches within Substrate at the moment. We know we're going to break a bunch of crates. Namely, for example, SC service, which is an in-between client thing for service, and we might gonna do that actually pretty often until we figure that out. And that would defeat a part of the story, if we now release as 2.0, we would suggest this is considered stable, but then within the next year, maybe go to 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, 7.0, 8.0, without good reason for most people. It's mainly because what the version number indicates is just a breaking change. And as we know, we have breaking changes scheduled for them. We decided to go for a few of them to indicate, look, there's going to be breaking changes. However, for 2.0 as well as for the 0.8 crates, we're confident enough that they are okay enough to build upon for you now. Like, if you don't need cumulus and if you don't need the specific thing we do in parachains, you don't even have to upgrade for the foreseeable future, and it will build. You could even still supply patches or backport things to the 0.8 series. If you want one of these changes, however, you would just switch the number from 0.8 to 0.9 to 0.10. And once we have that in a stable fashion, we will probably switch to major versions as well. The idea is generally that you don't want to have thousands of major versions lying around, because then you always have this very nasty upgrade secrets. And in line with Semware, we wanted to have the 0x series for at least a few of them, where we're like, we just don't know yet.
I see. So those packages, like with 0.8, we can expect a lot of exciting features coming.
I'm not sure if you consider that exciting. There's stuff that's going to break, and that is all that means. If you need that feature, then you will upgrade. But honestly, over the last half a year or so, the majority of stuff that we've done was primarily to get Polkadot out there, to get like these specific features out there that most people didn't need to upgrade for their own chains. You could build something nice. However, you couldn't stay up to date because of the Git dependency, and the cargo update would just mess with you every time. And so this is what this signifies for me. Is we say this is a stable set of things. I would still always recommend to take the latest Substrate Hub node template as the basis that you want to start with, just to be able to have like the latest set of features. There's another question.
Right.
How do you know if parachains can run with different versions of Substrate than the relay chain? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but the version number for on-chain is only defined through the runtime itself, and the runtime has a versioning scheme completely outside of what I'm describing. The versioning scheme of runtimes is there's a spec definition, which is just an increasing integer, and then there's an implementation definition. The spec definition is basically the major, and the second is basically the minor, or a patch level, how you want to see it. But that is it. This 2.0 and this kind of stuff, what we currently talk about is just the compatibility layer. You can have a runtime or two runtimes that are built from different internal crates at different version numbers that both implement the same spec. That is technically possible. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. So I can have parachains built on Substrate 2.0 when the relay chain is built on Substrate 3.0. That's the thing. Like this is also why I'm here. I don't want anybody to think that there's going to be a Substrate 3.0. That is not going to be a thing. There is going to be certain crates that are 3.0. The majority of the crates you see are probably going to stay in the 2x area anyways. What you're going to see is Polkadot before parachains and Polkadot after parachains. And there is a chance that to become a parachain, that you need to be behind or after a certain version number of a set of crates to be able to achieve that. And some of them might have been breaking changes, but not even be 3.0, but 4.0 or 5.6 or something in between. The same is true for if, aside from parachains, you want to build using Cumulus, you will have certain crate requirements that are higher version numbers. And although we of course intend to do as little breaking as we can, some of them will break. Does that answer your question, David? Okay.
Yeah. So another question from Thomas. So the Git
Yeah,
dependencies job is now delegated to Cargo?
Git dependencies job. I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but I guess you mean that Git dependency version definition. So Git dependencies are a feature that Cargo provides itself. So even like the resolving of the Git dependency is something that Cargo provides. So it's not really delegated. The main delegation difference is that you're not trying to tag a specific branch. So if you were doing master on Git dependencies, you would have breaking changes all the time, because whenever you did a Cargo update, it would fetch the latest master and that would break it. So the version numbers aren't somewhere when you use Git. With this now being hosted on Crates.io, they are enforced somewhere, and we want to adhere to somewhere. There have always been issues, like we messed up somewhere when we did beta dot numbers. Apparently, in the way that Cargo understands it, if you have a pre-release and you have a dot in there, it understands that again as its own versioning system. So 0.8 and 0.9 were expected to not break, and we broke it. We're sorry. This is why we later opted for RC6, no dots anymore. But yes, the idea is to use Cargo a lot more in the way that Cargo is intended to be used, and not just make it work for us developers, but actually be something that you can build upon.
And I personally think that, like, depending on the crate version and the version in the crate is more like reliable and more stable than using the Git.
It is. Well, I mean, if you were, it's comparable to, not even comparable, but if you were not tagging to the branch master, but we're tagging to a specific commit, which is still what we do in Polkadot, for example, we still have Git dependencies and we still depend on specific commits, then you were tied to this commit. But if other updates happened that were compatible, there was no way for you to get them unless you actually switched forward in this linear system for all crates. This is now different. You can say, I want this crate at 2.0, I want this crate at 2.1, I want this crate at 3.0. You don't have to care that they originate from the same repository. It doesn't matter. And I think that allows for a lot more flexibility on the side of the developers.
Okay.
So giving you the other thing that I think this means is that upgrading to latest features is on your schedule, which is already what I described just before. If we were to release on major version changes, unlike the HTTP where all of them have to have the same hash, we don't force you, or if you tag to master, we don't force you to upgrade everything. Like, you want this upgrade of that one palette? Sure, just upgrade that one palette. Assuming that it's compatible with the rest of the system, there you go. We don't force you to upgrade all of the other stuff as well, which is exactly how it's supposed to be. We just didn't do it right. So in general, the idea is here to make the life of people using something with the Substrate crates a lot easier. That's the main takeaway. And we already had this case. So we released Substrate last week, and then we saw that the palette proxy migration system isn't quite up to standard, as in it would try to upgrade every time you ran, not only after it had upgraded. It's not a really security issue, but it's wasting like cycles. And I've just pushed this new version with the patch out there to Crates.io. So if you look at the palette proxy, you see it's not 2.0 anymore. It has a new patch level, the 0.1. And if you were to do a cargo update now and had something that used the palette proxy, I don't think that's in the default node module and node template at the moment, but if you were to use that, you would immediately get it. You don't have to do changes. Cargo knows this is compatible. I take the latest version because it's more awesome. Done. Mwah. That's exactly how we want. We've already briefly talked about a few things it doesn't mean, and I think it's important to emphasize that because there's, for some reason, people like to pack a lot of information in like really small numbers. So let me be clear what 2.0 does not mean. It's not the end of development. I hope I made it clear. We are still doing a lot of stuff, and 10 years from now, you will probably not build on any Substrate 2.0 crate anymore. I don't believe that. The Rust ecosystem overall is pretty stable compared to like Node.js, for example. It's probably more comparable to Python, although that has been also slow at some point. But I doubt that this is it. There's still a lot of things we want to do, and I already mentioned the meta crates that will have a very quick iteration cycle as well. It also does not mean that as Parity, we're supporting 2.0 long term. As already mentioned, like for a few crates we already know we're going to break it. For a few we suspect that we're going to break them. And because Polkadot, Parachains, and Cumulus are still our highest priority, if we have to break it, we have to break it. And if you run an old version, we might simply say, sorry, either you get an enterprise support contract with us, or you're not necessarily going to get all the new features unless you upgrade. I think that is for now an okay-ish thing. Once we have a stable Polkadot network out there, there's probably going to be like a set of versions that we're going to maintain in a more long-term system. I see there's another question. Is Parity hosting all the produced crates additionally on other cargo repos available to everyone to avoid the risk of a single point of failure if the cargo repo becomes available or corrupted? Not at the moment, no. At least not publicly. I know that we're working with the palette, the Substrate marketplace, on a system that allows even for what's the idea? How do you describe that? Non-publicly known crates, as in you might be, let me put it this way. We're toying with the idea that you could publish crates there that are that require different licenses and are not open source licenses necessarily. This is particular for an enterprise market where there's certain auditing requirements and other things around certain security phenomenon and TPM and that kind of witness. Right now, this marketplace is only shown as a UI and not something that you can use as an alternative cargo source.
I think we can also always revert back to use the GitHub repo.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. Like the one thing that is nice on crates, like even when crates.io was down last year because of Cloudflare issues, the entire index is actually hosted on GitHub. Like you can go to GitHub and crates.io and you will have the entire index. You do not have all of the static assets in there. That is true. So the zip file that is uploaded. I know there have been work, but not from us, to host it on IPFS, and it's still something that I like. One of the ideas I still have for what we should do with Substrate is actually build an alternative crates.io, where Substrate acts as the repository of this registry, like crates.io does at the moment, and then we would use IPFS as a decentralized backend system to host all of that data, and you would not have to use GitHub, which is also the single point of failure in this system of crates.io, because you have to log in through GitHub, but you would just do it with a signature, like actual crypto, like how it should be, decentralized and all of that stuff. And there has definitely been a cargo IPFS distribution mechanism before. I've seen that. It might have been experimental. We are currently not hosting one, to answer the question. Let me get back to the slides then. Yeah, so sorry, these are not necessarily supported long term, which does not mean that even if we release new versions, if you have fixes for older versions, that we still accept them. I don't think there's much of a reason to not do that, and the reason why this is cheap and easy for us to do, I'm going to come back to next. One thing to keep in mind, and that is highly important in a decentralized system like ours, is that Semver only guarantees that it compiles, which simply means that the API did not change between two versions when it's automatically upgrading. That does not necessarily mean that the things that happen in between didn't change. I mean, obviously it should have changed, because otherwise, why is a new version? Sometimes that is as isolated as there's just a new feature, so there's a new functionality, so fine. But sometimes this can also mean the internal structure that is being used that is storing data on chain has changed. And if you're running something on an old version, building that new runtime with a new version might be incompatible because of the data types that are currently stored. Let me repeat that, because that is important. Considering that you have built a runtime on a specific version, that internally might use and store data in a specific structure on chain, that a Semver compatible upgrade of the same palette might do differently. This is the entire concept and the entire problem space of data migrations, and it is a huge pain in the butt in web development already, but there you have usually one consumer, which is your own website, and not a distributed system that needs to either upgrade all at once or continuously upgrade through upgrade on write. I don't know if you know that concept. However, there's an entire team within Parity currently working out on a good common way of data migration updates, which is the main issue you have. But Semver also does not guarantee. Sorry, let me just. Semver does also not guarantee that your RPC call would be the same afterwards, even if it doesn't data migrations for you automatically. If you plug on the chain, if you read from the chain, it does not mean that they are exactly the same, or even the function calls between two runtime upgrades are exactly the same. Jimmy, go ahead.
So say I'm already but the community is already operating a decentralized network. Now I want to upgrade it. I want to try to make it a private, small testing environment first, and upgrade and see if there's anything wrong before I actually launch it in the mainnet. How can I do that? Or the best practice of doing this?
Yeah, so this goes a little bit out of scope for 2.0 specifically, but of course, running data upgrades, so running like version upgrades of the runtime, is a big concern for us. We have been doing this mostly manually for the Polkadot releases so far, and it's a pain in the butt, and also obviously not as reliable. There's a few people working on different solutions that we're currently trying to get them together to allow for automatic upgrade testing. So effectively, what this tool does, you can find it. I think it's already public, and we are expecting to be able to.
Whoa. So we'll wait for Ben to reconnect. He should be back. Not that quick. I'm reading Julian questions. Are substrate versions inferred from code changes? But what do you mean?
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay. What was the last thing you heard? Because I opened another window and I think I broke the internet by typing something into my browser. Okay, let me share that again. So we were briefly talking about how to automatically test data migrations, right?
Yeah.
And so there's efforts to make this an automated process as well. I posted the link here. It is not. I was promised it has a README now, which apparently it doesn't. But the idea essentially is that you can connect to an existing chain. You sync up to the latest state, and then you have the test runner. What it basically does, it mocks the signature functionality, the host function to check for signatures, and allows you to create a block with the runtime upgrade through effectively that signature. And so you can run that runtime upgrade, and then you can just have it continue producing blocks and see whether your chain acts the way you want with automated tests. That is still in its infant phases, and they're just getting started on making it actually work. Like, it's working, but the idea is to get a system upgrade test, a manual one, through the system this week. So there's also, of course, there's work on our side to do that.
We have a lot of bootcamp team and builders team asking these questions, how to ensure the upgrade.
Obviously, this is also something that we are concerned about, running our own validators and stuff. But I think once we have that, I'm going to get some of the developers in a seminar as well and explain how to use it and how it works and how you can facilitate that yourself later.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be cool.
Let's definitely put a pin on that. That's definitely something cool. It also does not mean, coming back to what 2.0 actually means, and does not mean that all new features will be available for it. While there is a strong push to try to build stuff in a way that we can release them as 2.1 for most crates where we can, there's already like 3 or 4 PRs open, which would be major breaking changes to at least some of the crates. And it's not feasible to backport that. So we won't. So what's next? What follows after 2.0 then? Well, so one thing I think I hope I made clear is that we intend to release a lot more often than once every 1 year and a quarter, which is our current release cycle. We actually intend to not even go for like continuous releasing as you know it, where every couple of weeks there's a release, but actually build tooling and make tooling available that whatever is on master goes to crates.io. The way we achieve that is through having a system that automatically checks for every file that changed and the crates that belong to that, whether these are somewhere relevant changes, and if so, bump the version numbers in the entire tree. And once that happens, they get once they get merged into master, we directly push them all to Crates.io as well. That also will mean that we will probably, we haven't started that yet, but especially for major breaking changes, have changelogs per crate. Right now we have one major changelog that is automatically created, but as changelog entries or version upgrades become part of one PR every time, we intend to put into the changelog what has changed, especially in major versions, what has changed, what do you need to do to upgrade, what else do you need to understand of what has upgraded, what has changed that you might need to be aware of. And ideally have that available from the README, which means that you would also see it from Crates.io directly. Another thing that we're pondering with is whether we want to split off what is currently the folder frame, the client, and primitives into separate repos. The reasoning behind that is that they are already on very different schedules, just in terms of being developed, and in terms of teams and the way that they are treated, but they're in one repository, which makes it awkward at times to manage that. The other thing is that when we pushed out this primitives, we basically pushed out everything that was in primitives, but we were very early in splitting stuff into multiple crates. And there's a good argument that, sure, now we have this primitive crate for, I don't know, transaction pool that contains a lot of stuff, but only Substrate client transaction pool depends on that. No one else cares. So then why is that a separate crate? There's no good reason. The other thing is that if you look at the primitives folder today, you have a lot of crates in that, like 30-ish or something. Although the API between frame or any runtime and client is 2 or 3 crates. So what do all of the other primitives do in there? Why are they not either in client or in frame? And the idea is to make it a lot more clear what is the barrier, what is the actual interface that client and frame have from each side, to also allow you to build other implementations of Substrate or the outer environment that you need to provide to run frame-like runtimes, as well as to provide runtimes that are not frame-built. We have this very long-standing Substrate Dev Hub issue of trying to create a frameless runtime, even still using Rust, but basically have a runtime that does not depend on any frame or frame-specific features, but only uses primitives, and also that as small set as possible, which we already have running. It doesn't accept transactions yet, though. But if you're curious about this, there's an open issue on the Substrate
in recipe.
Hub, in the recipes. And I already saw that Josh is watching me do stuff here, so
yes.
He has been the one that pushed that a lot. So shout out to Josh. And that's it from my side. This is what I wanted to convey. This is the information that I wanted to hand over and make clear around the 2.0 release and what we're going to see next. I've already answered a bunch of questions. I'm happy to answer more if there are any.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben, for the presentations and explaining about the Substrate v2. And I'll see if there's any questions. I have one, but I'll let the audience to ask first.
Why they're not asking anything, just ask me the question. Otherwise, we look stupid.
So since so there will be like basically all the crate will have their own independent upgrade path, right? From my understanding. Then I'm wondering, like, as part of the DevOps team, how do I catch up on like which crate has been upgraded and then which part of documentation I have to update?
So for anything that is minor or patch version, you mostly don't care. They would just go through that. You mostly care when you look at the documentation on docs.rs, for example. That always pushes you to the latest version. And there you have to look at, like, okay, is that a feature I want to use now? Has that been introduced in a specific version? That then you need to make sure that your local cargo terminal is actually at least on that version level. For major upgrades as well as for palettes, and we haven't figured out the entire story in palettes yet. I mentioned that migrations is an issue. So one of the ideas is that we might build in automatic migrations for all minor and patch level changes, and then whenever there's a major upgrade where developers are expected to look at this thing, some of them might be carved out or might be said like, we don't want to build them in anymore. So if you still want them, you have to explicitly add a feature that gives you the older migrations, right? But that is part of that team that is currently building them. In these kind of circumstances, if you go to crates.io, you would always get the version that is the latest version number,
right,
in terms of somewhere, so the highest major. And that would already be pretty blunt. Like it's 4.0 and you're on 2.0. So there's at least 2 major upgrades you need to look at. And then from that, you would definitely have a link to the changelog that tells you, look, from 1.0 to 2.0 or from 2.0 to 3.0, this is what you need to do. Like we removed this function, it's now called this way. You might remember when we moved the crates around to the new names with SP and SC and that kind of stuff. So one of the things is if it's a really complicated thing that also a lot of people have to do, we might provide scripts. We might give you like, look, you want to run this script, it does the changes. It's really a question of how much work that is and how many people have that issue. Helpers like that are definitely appreciated. So if you do something, if you do this manual thing and you're like, oh, so this is the following set command, post it. We happily put that in the changelog for others to make that easier.
Yeah. I think we have to try it out, the whole upgrade path.
Yeah. Another obvious potential path for, at least for palettes, is also to have differently named palettes. So that you say, okay, this is a functionality set for treasury, right? And now we do something else, or we have a completely different architectural approach to a similar idea. So we also name it completely differently, so that you don't get confused about it's acting completely different because it has a completely different base assumption, for example, or idea of how people interact. So the processes changed a lot. So in this kind of system where palettes are involved, you're much closer to maybe in a user interface, actually, right? Like these things define the processes that people can do on your chain. So whenever you change these kind of processes, you need to make that more explicit, and the people need to understand that the clicks they need to do are completely different now, and why, because otherwise they can't remember. So there's there's this tension of saying, if you have a different approach to something, you probably want to name it differently from the get-go, then provide a patch that provides like the treasury can act either this way or that way. That is confusing to people. Call one treasury, call the other one treasure hunter, whatever. That's probably a good strategy going forward.
Say if I met I'm a builder or bootcamp team. I depend on like 30 crates in Substrate. So basically, half a year later, I have to like independently check each of these crates, like what version, what upgrade it has been going, right? Like this.
So the thing about major changes is that unless you want the feature, you don't have to upgrade.
Okay.
Right? Like the reason you want to upgrade is because something was added, some features were added. And as I said, like the focus for us is on basically remote signer, which is Polkadot relevant, Polkadot parachains, and Cumulus as the main big things that are okay to break things from our position at the very moment. There's also like async off-chain workers is on the schedule, and something that was probably going to break the way that off-chain workers work, obviously. But if you don't need that, why upgrade? Of course, good maintenance would mean that like you would go over that, and yeah, it might be a day to check out where are we standing, and what is the upgrade path. But considering that potentially also means you have to convince a governance council of a runtime upgrade, that's probably what takes longer time than you looking over the changes and fixing the things that have changed for new features if wanted. Like if the new features aren't wanted and there's no security issue filed from us, it doesn't really matter. And Hernando's also posting that you can also use Dependabot, obviously, for major versions to remind you that things have changed.
Cool.
Maybe one word on security, because this now came up. So one thing that we were also not very good or able to communicate very clearly before is if there were security changes in an older version, there was no way to tell you running that older version, dude, don't do that. It's broken. It's super security issue. But for example, the proxy palette we looked at earlier, we eventually decided it's not as much of a security issue. But one thing you can do on Cargo is to mark crates as specific versions as something that security-wise shouldn't be used anymore, which is called yanking. So you would mark that, like you can still, if you have it cached, locally build it with your cached version. But Cargo will tell you, look, this thing, the maintainer said don't use it. It's like you're playing with fire here. And that is something we can also do now. So we can push new versions, and for especially if we find security features, security problems in older versions, there's a strong incentive for us to still yank the old version and provide a patched version, so a Cargo update, which is give you the version that is now fixed. So, like when upgrading your chain, major upgrades primarily should mean there's new features that you want. Otherwise, a Cargo update should be doing it fine and give you the latest security benefits. But as I said before, currently not committing on doing that for all 2.0 upgrades.
Cool. All right. I don't have any questions, and I don't see any questions as well. All right.
All right then.
Yeah. So I think that's a good seminar, and thank you again for your time. And if there's any questions about Substrate release V2, feel free to post your questions in the Element channel, Substrate seminar.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for listening. I say that there's a lot of people over here. I appreciate spending the time on something as dull as versioning, but I really hope that it makes all our lives a lot easier going forward. And have a good afternoon, evening, and good night to use the Truman Show.
See you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.